Hi, everybody. We're at DocTalk in December. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. It was a valuable time in this country to give thanks because over the last 2.5 years, we have been through a lot. And we are we're at a transition point, let's put it that way, in the health and public health in this country. We have at least one stress test that's going on now, but we are thankful that we're beginning to reestablish our lives together in church, at sporting activities, at concerts, watching World Cup together, which is an occasion I had last week. We had a great time together. And at Thanksgiving, we were thankful for the opportunity that we're moving beyond masks and our kind of fear of other people. The stress test we're going through now, though, is, and we knew this, and if you review these tapes from 2 years ago, you will see that we said once COVID has settled a little bit, and I'll call it, we're in a settled point now for COVID, that other infectious diseases were going to be spreading at an increasing rate because humans not exposed to other humans don't pass infectious diseases. And if you will, the infectious diseases say, I'll get you at some point. And so that's kind of where we are. The key topics right now are really influenza and RSV, as well as a little bit of remnant COVID. Let me discount right now Mpox. Mpox is the name for the disease formerly known as monkeypox. And officially now Mpox has gone through its phase of being quite transmissible. It is to a low-level transmissibility, and the public health emergency related to Mpox is gone. That really is not only for this country, but across the globe. So Mpox, not a big concern at this point. For those of you who really are interested in the topic, Ebola and another outbreak of Ebola on the continent of Africa is of concern to us. What's really relevant in the Northern Hemisphere right now is the spread of the regular infectious diseases that we faced every wintertime in this side of the globe, and influenza, particularly influenza A, particularly the H3N2 version of influenza A, but a little bit of H1N1 is now sprinkling in, giving people relatively severe illness with influenza A. Very fortunately, the flu vaccine for this year was formulated with H3N2 version of influenza. So those of you who haven't gotten your flu shots yet, I would strongly recommend it. It's in my arm, and to date, I have been protected from H3N2 and other flus. The flu has hospitalized a lot of people, and at this point in hospitals across the country, which are very stressed, the number one infectious disease that is coming in is influenza A. Across most of the country right now, even in children's hospitals, the number one admission is for influenza A. About 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, we passed through nationally what was the peak of RSV in children. RSV is a particularly bad infection for little children. It still is uncomfortable for older children, but not a life threat the way it is in very young children. And we had a lot of children and infants sick with RSV. We stressed our children's hospitals, and they have passed their stress test for the most part. And a couple weeks ago, in most of the jurisdictions I work with, influenza admissions passed RSV admissions in terms of the number of children that had to be admitted for their infectious diseases. Many more children had RSV and were not hospitalized. Many children have influenza A and are not hospitalized either. But it's still very, very uncomfortable for parents and for grandparents whose little ones have influenza A or RSV. They cough, their noses run, they have fevers, they look terrible, they don't want to eat. Some of them will puke and have diarrhea. You're looking for medicines for them, and we're short on many of the pediatric medicines right now, including our products for acetaminophen and ibuprofen, which are our primary medicines that we use in children for fever and symptom control. So just be aware of that. For children that get bacterial infections in addition to their viral infections, they need an antibiotic called amoxicillin, and amoxicillin is in critical shortage right now across the country in its pediatric versions. So our pediatric stress test for RSV, we have passed the peak nationally. Still some areas of the country that are lit up with RSV, and those children's hospitals still very busy. Influenza A risk to every bit of the population from the very youngest to the very oldest. Children at a very, very low age, newborns and infants, less risk for influenza because they have mom's protective antibodies. As we get older and in the senior age groups, clearly influenza A becomes a life threat. And the life threat is because influenza wipes out your immune system. It harms your organs when you're older. And if you already have, some underlying medical problems, it can really make the function of those people very difficult. They get very ill and some of them die, unfortunately. So a really good piece of our public health teaching right now is don't go to work sick, get your influenza vaccine, protect the elderly from flu. And so many communities and many hospitals now are back to using masks. And that's not primarily about COVID anymore. At this point, it's about RSV and influenza, both of which spread through respiratory droplets and you coughing and sneezing. And if you will not do those things around elderly people, and if you're in public, wearing a mask is one way to protect both you and those that may be at risk. For those that have gotten sick, oftentimes getting an assessment by a physician, whether it's your primary physician, urgent care, or the emergency department, has been one way to see if you need treatment. And so we have targeted treatments for influenza. We have targeted treatments for COVID. At this point, we only have supportive treatment for RSV. So for parents and grandparents, we don't have a specific antiviral that works for RSV. You ought to be aware of that. And that's what your pediatrician or urgent care center will tell you once they've made that diagnosis. The diagnosis of RSV and flu and COVID, as you know, comes through a swab in the nose. And sometimes one swab will give you multiple tests. And so you can come in to be checked for COVID, and they say, nope, you don't have COVID, you've got influenza A. And I want to make you aware, there are some elderly people who had got their noses swabbed looking for influenza, and they found RSV. And close to us is a 90-year-old who was admitted to the hospital with RSV. That's unusual. Just be aware that's unusual. And in the past, we would never have swabbed a 90-year-old for RSV. So it may be that it's been around this kind of behavior for years. But right now you will hear of those cases where even the elderly have picked up what has typically been a virus that affects little people. For whatever reason, that elder person doesn't have the protection. Maybe early in their life, they were never exposed to RSV, which would be very rare in this country. But maybe they weren't exposed, or maybe their protection from it had waned over many, many years. So you will hear about RSV in the elderly. You will hear about flu in all of the age groups. You will know that getting a diagnosis enables, in some cases, you to get antiviral treatment. You should know that some kids go in and get swabbed and they're negative for COVID, they're negative for RSV, and they're negative for flu. And then they look in their tonsils and they've got strep. And so that is a bacteria, and that involves antibacterial treatment with an antibiotic. And that's where, for example, in children, we would pull out amoxicillin as one of the antibiotics we typically use for strep infections. A couple more pieces. Bivalent vaccinations for COVID have now been proven to be successful in protecting against the current variants of COVID that are circulating in this country. So for those of you who haven't gotten jabbed in the last 9 months, you are a candidate to get the bivalent examination. It went in my left shoulder about 3 weeks ago now, 4 weeks ago, and it is protecting me from the current variants of COVID. So COVID update jabs. So that was my 4th jab, and I got sick with COVID in May. Many of you remember that. So I've had 5 immunizing experiences with COVID. And about a year from now, I will be looking for another one in my shoulder, hopefully protected from the clinical disease. Right now, COVID is at a low level, circulating through the country. Little bump occurred in occurrences of COVID after Thanksgiving. In general, COVID is not causing a lot of hospitalizations, and the hospitalizations that are occurring are in unvaccinated people and in people who have underlying problems that don't allow their immune system to work very effectively. But we're not seeing COVID as being a big driver of deaths or critical illnesses right now. Instead, we have hospitals that are full of flu patients and RSV patients in the pediatric age groups, and then a variety of other infectious diseases that spread in this early winter time. Some of you have also had surgeries that got canceled. And why is that? Because our health care system has really taken a beating in the last 2.5 years. And in many cases, they have shut down hospitals. They have shut down areas of hospitals. And what is remaining is at much less capacity than there was in the past. That gets frustrating when people are trying to get elective surgeries and other procedures done, and somebody calls the day of surgery and says, your surgery's been canceled because we don't have staff. We don't have the ability to work through in our hospital right now the performance of elective procedures. We are still short on medicines. There's still supply chain problems in the healthcare system, and certainly there's staff shortages. So when you are planning for those things, particularly in the winter months, please be aware that there are stresses in the healthcare system. For those of you who are blood donors, we're also heading into a period of time where blood is short. And so please be generous if you're a blood donor in being able to give some blood for those that will need it over the holiday and New Year times. Went a little long because it's been 4 weeks since I've had the opportunity to present here. We have really good news. And what I am looking forward to, just so you know that there really is a really bright sun out there, is I think we're going to make it through this bolus of winter-related respiratory illnesses, and that COVID has shown no signs right now that it is going to flare again in a dangerous fashion. And so 2023, we may be talking about a very different approach to healthcare. We may not have emerging infections that we're doing a great deal of teaching on and public education on. We may rebuild our healthcare system, rebuild our public health system, and get back to the things that we love doing and thinking about better care for people from public safety providers like myself. And it's going to be a great new year ahead. That's my prediction. So take care. DocTalk, December. Get ready for the holidays. Enjoy your time. Enjoy each other, and be thankful for the opportunities we have to convene again. Thank you all. Take care.